This is a note to self to demonstrate how jQuery creates inline styles when you use its CSS function. Here we have a simple HTML file which really consists of nothing more than an empty div and 3 buttons. Each button will fire off a particular jQuery function that sets the CSS. And up here in the styles, take note that there is a default div style. That the important thing to note in this demonstration is that the default div will have no image in the background, and then there is a media query that sets the div's background to a particular, in this case it's a blue circle, when the viewport or the screen is 800 pixels or larger. Okay, so now this is what this HTML looks like when it's rendered in the browser, and you'll see this is the blue circle, and we're getting the blue circle because the screen is currently 800 pixels or larger. And if I were to shrink this browser screen down, you'll see that the circle goes away, because now the browser is using this div here that we define note background image. Now let's go back to some size where it brings in the circle. So all we have shown right now is that we have HTML that uses a media query, and we're changing the div's background to none or to a blue circle. That's all we've done so far. Now what I want to demonstrate is what happens when you use jQuery to add a background image. And so to do that, I'm going to use the Chrome's built-in developer tools. Let's make it a little larger so we have more screen here. That sure is slow with this video software. I'm using QuickTime to make this video. Anyway, as you can see, this is the important thing I want to point out to myself here, that right now the div has no inline elements, and I wouldn't expect there to be inline elements because I didn't specify any inline element. But if I fire off this, or if I click this add image, well, let's just go in order. If I hit remove image, notice how jQuery, okay, when I hit the remove image, I fired off this first function here. I'll highlight it, and I'm telling jQuery set an inline style to a background image of none for all divs. And it did that, as we can see here in the developer tools. It's a convenient tool to see what happens on the fly. We have an inline style there. It's that says background image is none. And so what's interesting now is, now that there's an inline style, that's going to override any kind of styles that I might have defined up in here in my HTML page, or if I were to reference it in a different CSS file. No matter what I do to the browser, if I want to make it 800 pixels or larger, the media query still doesn't fire off. Or maybe I should say it fires off, but it doesn't display that blue circle. We can see here in the developers tool that it is firing off the media screen, min width is 800 pixels. But notice how the developer tools scratches out the background image. So that's a clue given to us by the developer tool that it says, well, I'm trying to use this, or I'm looking at this media query, but I'm not going to use the background image that you specified in that media query because it's being overwritten by the style, the inline style that was created there by jQuery. And so that's why we don't see the blue circle. If I hit the Add Image button, now an orange circle appears. And notice how the inline style changed. It changed the inline style from background image. The URL is now pointing to an orange circle. And that is because that's what I specified over here in this function, that when the Add Image button gets clicked, we're going to fire off a jQuery CSS function that says, hey, set the background image to something orange, or an orange circle. And so what jQuery does is creates an inline style for that background image. Now, if I were to resize the screen, man, it's so slow, it's so annoying. You'll see here the developer tools is saying that it's using this style from up here that I specified up here, but it too has the background image set to, or scratched out, and that's because the inline styles are overriding that. The specificity, wow, that's a hard word to say for me, is that inline styles will override any CSS file or embedded style in your HTML. So that's why the media query appears to not be working. It's specifically because this inline style is overriding it. Okay, so this is the third function, and this is to me the most interesting one. We have this reset image that will, when I click it, I will be firing off this jQuery function here, where I say CSS background image is set to an empty string. So let's see what happens when we click that. I clicked it and nothing's happening. Click it again. Okay, notice what it did in the HTML. It removed the inline style. It's now back to the default setting that I have, or to the raw HTML that I have. And so because there's no inline style, now the browser is going to reference or going to be using these styles here, or I should say that these styles here will now not be overwritten by any inline style, because the inline styles doesn't exist anymore. So now whatever I do with the browser, shrink it, it will now use this div here, this div style, and notice how the background image none is not scratched out anymore. And if I expand it to larger than 800 pixels, then it will use the media query as it says right here, and it too is not scratched out, the background image. So the important thing to note is, number one, when you use the jQuery CSS function, what it actually does is write an inline style into the HTML. And number two, when you have an inline style, that's going to override any other style that you might have in an external file or an embedded style tag. So hopefully that clarifies how jQuery uses CSS and how you might use the syntax of an empty string to remove any jQuery that you might have added, so that the browser will reference other CSS. I don't even know what I'm talking about anymore. I'm done.